Everyone assumes the loudest person in the room is the most powerful. That's why they keep talking, because noise feels like control. But there's someone in every group who almost never speaks. They're not shy. They're not bored. They're watching. That's why they already know things about you that you haven't said out loud yet. By the end of this video, you'll understand one thing. The quietest person in any room is almost never the least dangerous. Because silence isn't emptiness, it's a strategy. Psychologists call it the observer effect in social dynamics. When someone chooses not to speak, every other person in the room starts filling in the blanks themselves. That's why quiet people get attributed with more intelligence, not because they said something smart, but because they said nothing at all. In a 2016 study from the University of Groningen, participants consistently rated silent group members as more competent than equally qualified vocal ones. The reason? Silence signals that you're evaluating, not reacting. That's why it reads as confidence, not weakness. Quiet people develop something loud people rarely do: the ability to read a room without being in it. Because they're not focused on what to say next, they're free to notice everything else. Body language, contradictions, who looks at who when someone speaks. That's why quiet people often know about conflicts before they become conflicts. They notice the tension in the pause, not the argument that followed. This makes them extraordinarily hard to manipulate, because manipulation depends on the target not noticing. Here's what makes this dangerous. Most social situations reward visible effort. The person who talks most is assumed to be working hardest. That's why quiet people are consistently underestimated. And underestimation is the most powerful tactical advantage you can have in any competitive situation. In negotiation research, the side that speaks less wins more favorable outcomes. Not occasionally, consistently. Because talking reveals your position. Silence forces the other side to fill the gap. And people almost always reveal more when they're filling silence than when they're responding to questions. Why quiet people almost never lose arguments? It's not because they're smarter in the moment. It's because they don't argue in the moment. They wait. That's why by the time they speak, they've already seen the 3 weakest points in your position. And they only need one. Loud people argue with emotion, which means they argue to feel right. Quiet people argue with timing, which means they argue to be right. That's why one carefully placed sentence from a quiet person ends a conversation that 5 loud people couldn't. There's a social signal that silence sends that most people don't consciously register, but physically feel. When someone doesn't react to a provocation, it signals that the provocation didn't land. That's why provocateurs instinctively escalate against quiet people, because the absence of reaction feels like a challenge. And here's the loop payoff. Remember the person we described at the start? The one who was watching while everyone else talked? By this point in any social situation, they already know who's insecure, who's performing, and who's actually in control. That's why they're never surprised. They saw it first. The one thing quiet people almost never do, they don't explain themselves unprompted. That's why they feel slightly unknowable. And unknowable reads as powerful, because you can't counter something you don't fully understand. None of this means being quiet is automatically an advantage. It means deliberate silence is, because there's a difference between someone who can't speak and someone who chooses not to. One is passive. The other is strategy. So next time you're in a room and someone isn't saying much, don't assume they have nothing to say. Assume they've already said it in their head, evaluated it, discarded the weak parts, and are waiting for the exact right moment. That's not quiet. That's patient. If this changed how you see the quiet people in your life, or how you see